Hey guys, welcome back and thank you for tuning in to Rules for Rebels and another episode of Side Hustle Tuesdays. Today is episode 89. Today's story is about a college student who, while visiting and partying in Japan, discovered that Japan has an extensive hangover cure industry. After a hard night of partying and taking one of these hangover cure supplements, he awoke in the morning shocked to realize he didn't have a hangover. When he returned home, he brought with him a bunch of these hangover remedy cures. After running out, he began exploring this niche and wound up coming up with a product which wound up doing over $1 million in sales in its first 10 months and which today is doing over $200,000 per month in revenue. Now, the timeliness of this story is interesting. This past Friday night, I was hanging out with my girlfriend's brother who had just returned from a business trip down to Houston. We wound up taking it easy and staying in ordering some Thai food as he was beat from his trip. He mentioned how he had a lot of late nights entertaining clients and having drinks and would have to be up early the next morning to head out to more client meetings. This product would have been perfect for him. I tried a similar pill in the past called Chasers. I only took it a few times and oddly enough I didn't wake up with a hangover, so maybe there is something to this. Today's story is about Eddie Huey from New York. In the spring of 2015, while still a senior in college at NYU, Eddie traveled to Japan. For those who don't know, Japan very much so has a work hard, play hard attitude. And due to that, Japan has a $180 million per year hangover cure industry. On his first night out with friends, his friend showed up with a bunch of little bottles which looked something like a 5-hour energy drink and told him that those concoctions had been used for centuries to avoid hangovers. Eddie wasn't sure if they would work or not. However, after drinking and partying till sunrise, he woke up feeling a little bit tired, but aside from that, completely fine. No headache, no nausea, none of those typical signs we associate with a hangover. When Eddie returned home, he brought back with him a stash of these hangover prevention concoctions, but it didn't take long before he ran out. He began doing research on the hangover cure industry and researching a compound called DHM, which is derived from the Japanese raisin tree. In doing this research, he managed to connect with a gentleman who was a leading researcher on DHM, and at this point, he was sold on it. Now, as we previously mentioned, the hangover cure industry in Japan is huge. The hangover cure market in Japan is close to $200 million per year, and the USA is about 7 times the size of Japan. But nobody had introduced an effective solution to hangovers in the USA. Well, actually, like I said, there was a pill called Chasers from a few years back, but they never marketed it very well. I believe it was a different compound as well. I believe that was just a charcoal pill. Now, this part of the story is really interesting. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs will have an idea, but are hesitant to pursue it or shell out money, not knowing if it'll work. Eddie had a genius idea when it came to this. Before Eddie even had a product, he set up a landing page using Shopify with mock-ups of his product or what it would look like, and he began running ads to the landing page. During this experiment, Eddie spent $100 on ads targeting people who had shown an interest in alcohol and spirits. He wound up getting about 400 visitors to his site and had over 40 signups. That's over a 10% conversion rate. This result let Eddie know he was onto something and he pressed forward. Next was the process of designing, prototyping, and manufacturing the product. At this point in time, Eddie was still a college student. He had no idea about manufacturing or supply chains. He knew nothing about the supplement industry. Heck, he didn't even know how to run a business, but that didn't stop him. Eddie began researching CGMP regulations, which stand for Current Good Manufacturing Process, which requires manufacturers to evaluate their products through testing so consumers know exactly what they are getting. Through a little bit of Google searching, Eddie was able to narrow it down to about 50 USA-based suppliers who were CGMP certified, and he then further narrowed it down to 5 manufacturers based on where they sourced their ingredients. Eddie hit another stumbling block. Most of these manufacturers required a $2,000 to $3,000 fee for research and development of the product since it wasn't one that they already made, carried, or white labeled. Eddie was eventually able to talk one of the manufacturers into waiving this fee after showing them his market testing, his distribution channels he had set up, and essentially convincing them it would be a successful product which he would sell and continue ordering from them. Eddie wound up getting his first 100 packets as a sample completely free. He only had to pay for the shipping. Next, Eddie says things got kind of blurry. He had to do a lot of product testing, which essentially amounted to getting drunk, trying his product, and seeing if he got hungover. Eddie would invite friends over to go out drinking, he'd give them samples, and then survey them the next day to see how they felt. Eddie and his friends all loved the product, and shortly after this he placed his first real order. Eddie did hire a consultant to help him navigate the tricky FDA regulations in regards to how he could market the product. All in all, with consultants and the initial order, he had spent about $15,000, which was all of his savings, but he was able to do this because he was still living at home with his parents and could take the risk. After placing his first order, Eddie had an 8 to 10 week lead time before the product would arrive, so he decided to use this time to get his site set up and start marketing. Initially, he looked to have a custom website built, but after seeing how much web designers were charging, he decided to give it a go himself. He set up a Shopify store. He says he did about 90% of the work himself and hired a few freelancers to make some final tweaks. All in all, the site cost him about $500. Next, Eddie listed Flybuy on Product Hunt. Overnight, Flybuy got 262 upvotes and was featured in the Product Hunt daily email newsletter, and that's when things really started taking off. He began receiving emails from interested customers, influencers, and even investors. That led to connecting with an influencer with almost 2 million Instagram followers who wound up including Flybuy in an Instagram story completely free of charge just for a box of samples. Another trick or hack that worked well for Eddie was directing people to press articles. By that, I mean he directed a lot of his traffic at articles from the mainstream media about Flybuy as opposed to directing them to flybuy.com where they would actually order the product. Now, this may seem counterintuitive, as you normally want to send somebody to a landing page where they can actually make a purchase, but the articles provided a sort of social proof as opposed to just, hey, buy this, and that led to huge conversion rates. Another strategy that worked well in driving sales is email marketing. Eddie, like many marketers, says the money is in the list. He encourages other entrepreneurs to start building an email list. He says this accounts for over 20% of his sales. One tactic when it comes to email marketing, he says, is don't overdo it with sales and promotions. Eddie said that while these emails tend to do the best, it can also lead to your customers not buying at full price and just waiting for sales. Eddie says next that word of mouth advertising is one of his most effective means of driving sales. He says word of mouth advertising attributes to more than a third of their sales, and it has a compounding effect. By that, I mean to tell you, if I tell one person, and they tell 3 people, and they tell 3 people, it all starts to add up. One clever way Eddie and Flybuy have found to really push the word-of-mouth advertising is by offering free samples. Eddie realizes that people may be skeptical and not want to shell out $20 for his product, so for just a shipping fee of $2.95, they can order a sample pack, try it out for themselves, and see if it works. This is very smart, and not only does he let somebody try his product and potentially get some word-of-mouth advertising out of it, but he also now has their email address and can market to them via email completely free. Amazon is another powerful sales channel by Flybuy. Eddie says that 55% of consumers start their product search on Amazon, so it's important to be there and in front of them. It also provides social proof in regards to reviews, as many people, even if they don't buy on Amazon, will check reviews on Amazon of products that they're thinking about purchasing. At the beginning, Amazon only mounted to a small percentage of Flybuy sales, bringing in about $3,000 a month. However, today, and in less than a year, they were able to grow that to $100,000 per month on Amazon, and it now accounts for about 50% of their total business. Eddie says as long as you optimize your listing and have a product that's in demand, the sales will roll in. Flybuy also does partnerships with like-minded brands, and that's another way that Flybuy is growing quickly. They do giveaways, they do cross-marketing promos with alcohol brands, and they also give their product away for free to some subscription box services. It's a great and cost-effective way to get his product in front of his target buyers. As far as where the business is today and where it's heading in the future, today the company is profitable. The margins are about 60% before ad spend. They've been able to lower their cost by buying larger quantities. While online is the biggest component of the business, they are working on growing offline sales and are now carried in Urban Outfitters, Anthropologie, and American Eagle stores. They'd like to improve their retail presence and get in liquor stores, corner stores, and gas stations. They've also recently released an electrolyte concentrate called Flybuy Fuel, which has had a very successful launch, and they're also looking at launching 2 additional products next year. As far as words of advice and things that he's learned to pass on to other entrepreneurs, Eddie says one of the most important things he's learned is knowing your customer. He said a cheap and easy way to do this is to pull a report from Shopify, find a handful of your largest customers, pick up the phone and call them. Pretty straightforward, right? He says you'll want to find out who they are, their demographic, and why they're buying the product. Eddie says that this was incredibly helpful to his business. Well, prior to doing this, he figured that his target market was probably binge drinking college students. In reality, it was not. Hell, they can sleep all day if they want, right? Flyby's target demographic is actually late 20s to 40-year-old professionals. They may have a few glasses of wine or a couple cocktails, but they have to wake up early and they need to be sharp to go to work or take care of their kids. They can't be feeling hungover, so that's actually their largest demographic. One last piece of advice from Eddie before we conclude today's episode. Eddie said he would encourage entrepreneurs starting out to stop reading and watching educational content and get started. He says, well, there's a lot of great information out there. Learn the basics and just get started because there's probably 10 other people out there with the same idea as you. One thing that I found interesting about today's story is this is another example of someone who didn't have to reinvent the wheel or invent a completely new product. Eddie found a product while traveling in Japan, a product which worked and which he knew there would be a demand for in the States, but one that hadn't really been imported to the States, and while it may have existed here, a product which really hadn't been effectively marketed here. Eddie found a way to do that better, and he's been rewarded with some incredible sales numbers. Anyhow, guys, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed today's side hustle story. I hope you were inspired by it. And until next time, this is Rules for Rebels and Side Hustle Tuesdays, signing out.